Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Tonight we have news from the neighborhood. Pakistan is broke and buried under debt, seeking a bailout but refusing to mend its ways. It's a story of many parts and a lesson on how not to run a country. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister is preparing for a state visit to the US. In Europe, hundreds of thousands of people are out on the streets. British Home Secretary is telling the police to arrest the protesters instead of posing for photos with them. In the age of social media, can you really blame the cops? In Singapore, the blame game in jilted love has reached a court. And trust me, you've not heard a story like this before. Also on the show, we'll discuss the geopolitics of money, what makes the dollar so powerful, and why should you care? First, as always, the headlines. The United States opens its embassy in the Solomon Islands after an absence of 30 years. It's the latest move by Washington, D.C. to counter China's push into the Pacific. Israeli Prime Minister to hold talks with the French President. Netanyahu hopes to gain support from Macron against Iran's nuclear program amid a spike in violence in the region. A shocker from Kenya, 6 teachers arrested over a viral video which shows primary school students simulating sex as punishment. Shell records its highest profit in 115 years. The British energy giant's net profit surged to more than $42 billion last year amid soaring oil and gas prices due to the Russia-Ukraine war. And Hong Kong offers 500,000 free air tickets to visitors to resurrect the once vibrant global hub after 3 years of COVID-enforced isolation. Tonight, we start with the neighborhood. Balochistan is broke. It has stopped paying salaries to government employees. Balochistan is the southern province of Pakistan, its largest, yet least populated. The most resource-rich province, but with the poorest people. That's because Islamabad has been squeezing Balochistan for years. Dues running into billions are yet to be cleared. The local government is now desperate. It says Balochistan is being pushed into a disaster. It needs money urgently.
अभी तक हम अपने एम्प्लॉयज़ को तनख्वाहें भी नहीं दे सके बार बार यकीन दहानी तो हमें कराई गई है लेकिन अमली तौर पर हमें इंतज़ार है देखते हैं क्या होता है
Balochistan has been on the brink for a while now and the rest of Pakistan is getting there. The country is in dire straits. It has just 3 weeks worth of cash left. Inflation is at a 48-year high. Thousands of containers are held up at ports. Banks are refusing payments. Pakistan is in a shambles. A delegation from the International Monetary Fund or the IMF has rushed to the country. A bailout now looks certain. But even that is no guarantee of Pakistan's survival. The country is crumbling. It is facing what economists call a balance of payment crisis, which means Pakistan does not have any money left to pay for essentials. They can only buy 2,000 luxury cars, whether or not they have the fuel to drive them. Jokes apart, Pakistan is going the Sri Lanka way. The earnings are low, the expenses are way too high, plus there is a giant burden of debt. So it's struggling to sustain itself. It needs a bailout. And here's why that bailout will not be enough. Look at Pakistan's balance sheets. Its finances are rotten to the core. This is bailout number 23 for Pakistan, the 23rd bailout. Since 1958, they've gone to the IMF 23 times. That is the most by any country in this period. 23 bailouts. Even before the current crisis hit, Pakistan was on an IMF bailout program. It got a loan worth $6.5 billion in 2019. Out of this money, $6.5 billion, Pakistan has used up $3.9 billion. Along the way, the IMF stalled the program. Reason? The International Monetary Fund wanted Pakistan to make some sweeping changes. Pakistan did not comply, but now it has no choice. It will have to swallow the bitter pill. And what were these demands? Broadly, the IMF wanted Islamabad to do 2 things. Number 1, let the market decide what the Pakistani rupee is worth. And number 2, reduce expenses. It was as simple as that. But Pakistan rejected these demands. It wanted to dictate terms to the IMF. Can a country surviving on dole dictate terms? As they say, beggars cannot be choosers. Now, reality is biting Pakistan. This is collective failure from the Bhutto Zardaris to the Sharifs to Imran Khan. The political class has repeatedly failed the people, and the military generals have only filled their own coffers. Listen to this. Defense makes up 25% of Pakistan's budget. 25%. So Pakistan is poor, but its army is rich. Its military runs about 50 commercial entities. Their annual income is well over $1.5 billion. Even during such a grave economic crisis, the military in Pakistan is well cushioned. Last year, the government set a revenue target of around $27 billion. And what was their spending plan? 52% of this money would go to servicing the debt, to pay back the lenders. 33% was set aside for defense. This included spending on pensions. So to recap, 52% goes to lenders, 33% goes to the army. That's 85% of the total revenues. What's left for the people of Pakistan? A meager 15%. How can a country sustain with this kind of money? It cannot, which is why it is sinking. And the IMF agrees. Reports say it wants the military to cut its budget now. In fact, that's one of the new conditions they've imposed to revive the bailout. Cut the spending. But like I've been saying, it will not be enough. Pakistan will get just $1.1 billion from the IMF. That's it, $1.1 billion. They need more cash. They need $3 billion to meet external debt obligations. Another $5 billion to fix the current account deficit, which is the gap between the value of imports and exports. A total of $9 to $10 billion is needed to stabilize the Pakistani rupee. Where do you think all of this money will come from? The IMF or the Chinese? Pakistan is stuck between a rock and a hard place. It has no easy choices. Actually, it does. Shut down the terror factories. But it's a choice they don't even want to consider. So it doesn't really matter. Pakistan's total external debt is now well over $130 billion. It owes about $30 billion to China alone. I've said this in the past. Pakistan is a military with a country. Perhaps it's time for the military to foot some of these bills. From a virtually bankrupt nation, let's talk about the world's fastest growing economy, India. We've been telling you on the show how 2023 is India's year, how New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy, and how leading powers are paying attention to their ties with India. The United States is one of them. A few months back, it was trying to play both sides, an old bad habit. The Biden administration called India an important partner. At the same time, it was arming Pakistan. Washington gave aid to Islamabad to maintain its fighter jets. But now it seems to be making amends. Joe Biden wants to host Prime Minister Modi at the White House, and this is not like his previous visits or invites. This time, Prime Minister Modi has been invited for a state visit. It is the highest honor in terms of protocol, and these invitations are usually extended to close friends. When will it happen? In the month of June or July this year. The exact dates are still being worked out. And what can we expect? Nothing less than the red carpet. Reports say President Biden wants Prime Minister Modi to spend at least a couple of days in the US. There is a tentative agenda which includes a joint session of the US Congress. Prime Minister Modi will address American lawmakers and a state dinner at the White House. Now, what explains this special invite? The G20 summit, among other things. India will host the summit in the month of September, and before the big event, President Biden could be trying to build some synergies. The groundwork has begun. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval was in the US. With him was a high-powered delegation from New Delhi. Mr. Doval met top officials of Team Biden, like his American counterpart, Jake Sullivan, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The visit has yielded some tangible outcomes. The US and India have announced a new partnership. It's called the US-India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. I know it sounds heavy, but the thought is quite simple. Fundamentally, this is about national security. Some of the key focus areas are military equipment, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. The goal is to step up defenses against China. In fact, I have a quote from Jake Sullivan, the American National Security Advisor. This is what he says. The larger challenge posed by China, its economic practices, its aggressive military moves, its efforts to dominate the industries of the future and to control the supply chains of the future have had a profound impact on the thinking in New Delhi. So the US wants to collaborate more with India. How will this partnership work? Some areas have been identified, like mobile networks. America wants to work with India to push for alternatives. Chip manufacturing. Washington is ready to welcome more Indian specialists to the US. This is to boost manufacturing of semiconductors and defense manufacturing. India and the US want to encourage joint production. Some companies have already secured deals, like Lockheed Martin and Boeing. They have a partnership with the Tata Group. A few others are in the pipeline. General Electric, or GE, has expressed interest. The company builds aircraft engines. The US government is evaluating GE's application, and this outreach by Washington will be welcomed by New Delhi. And the US has a lot to make up for. President Biden has been in office for almost 2 years now. He is yet to send an ambassador to India. His top pick is a controversial one for the ambassador's post. And India is a partner that he needs very much. In fact, a deeper India-US partnership has always been a promising idea. This relationship has under-delivered. It has untapped potential. You could blame both America's hubris and India's hesitation for this. So can Prime Minister Modi and President Biden change the course? We say it's work in progress. Same with our next story, work in progress. The rising US-China tensions and moves to counter each other. China is stepping up activities in disputed waters. The US is building a coalition to take on China in the Indo-Pacific. Today's headline comes from the Solomon Islands, a tiny group of islands in the Pacific Ocean, off late at the center of a diplomatic tug of war. The United States has reopened an embassy in the Solomon Islands, and that too after 30 years. First, let me show you where these islands are. In the southwest Pacific Ocean, roughly 2,000 kilometers northeast of Australia, it's a chain of hundreds of islands lying east of Papua New Guinea. It has a population of less than 700,000. The Solomon Islands was also a battleground during the Second World War. Americans and Japanese troops fought a tough battle there. So the islands are not new to such tussles. They had close diplomatic ties with Taiwan until 2019. Then they dumped Taiwan and switched allegiance to China. Taiwan said this was done under Chinese pressure, and there's merit to this argument. And all of this had Washington worried.
Our embassy will accelerate that vital collaboration, building on decades of ties between our governments and our people. We'll do so at an important moment for the region we share, because more than any other part of the world, the Indo-Pacific region, including the Pacific Islands, will shape the world's trajectory in the 21st century.
The US had an embassy earlier in the Solomon Islands. It was shut down in 1993. So why is it being reopened now? This, you could say, is a reflection of America's changing diplomatic priorities. The reopening had been in the works since last year. You may remember what happened last year. The Solomon Islands signed a secret security pact with China, a pact that gave China military access. The draft was leaked. It was met with outrage both on the islands and outside. Prime Minister Sogavare defended the pact. He said China will help smoothen, quote unquote, the internal security situation of the Solomons. That China will build infrastructure. Reports say China also offered $8.5 million to the Solomons to dump Taiwan. And remember, this is a poor nation. More than 50% of the population does not have access to electricity. Australia was the first to raise alarm about the pact between the Solomons and China. Then the US stepped in. President Biden hosted Pacific Island leaders in Washington in a summit last year. He pledged to help stave off China's economic coercion. That's the term he used, economic coercion. Washington and 14 Pacific Island states signed a declaration to help democracy flourish. Guess who was one of the signatories? Solomon Islands' Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare, the same leader who had defended the pact with China. Join the dots and you'll realize what this shift could mean for Beijing. And the Solomons are some distance away. Closer home in the Philippines too, the US is making moves. America and the Philippines have signed a strategic deal. Washington will get access to more military bases in the Philippines, 4 more bases to be precise, which will bring the total number to 9. 9 Philippine bases, military bases, with US troops in them. Why? To help Washington move closer to Taiwan, and more importantly, to help the US cement its presence in the South China Sea.
I just want to be clear that we're not seeking permanent basing in the Philippines. As you heard us say in our statements here, EDCA is a cooperative agreement that enables rotational activities. And so it's a key pillar of training and opportunities to strengthen our interoperability. And it also provides us the ability to respond effectively to humanitarian.
So it's clear now the United States wants to flex its muscle. It wants to take on an expansionist China. And how is Beijing reacting? It is ramping up its presence in the South China Sea. Take the water surrounding the Vanguard Bank of Vietnam. It's an area that has been seeing repeated standoffs between Chinese and Vietnamese vessels. Chinese ships patrolled this area for 310 days last year. 310 days in a year. That's more than double compared to the year before. In the Spratly Islands, the patrol increased to 279 days from 232. That's an area where the Philippines has its troops. China is keeping a close eye on the latest developments. Its ships are there to monitor every minute movement in the waters. And with America's new coalition taking shape, China will have its hands full. India's international border in the northeast is tense again. There's fighting in Myanmar, and it's spilling into the Indian state of Mizoram. India shares a 1,600-kilometer-long border with Myanmar. The country saw a military coup 2 years back. The generals are facing an armed resistance, and they're cracking down hard. Last month, they launched airstrikes on militia groups. Some locals said these strikes violated India's sovereignty. An influential Mizo youth organization in the state of Mizoram said that there were some damages on the Indian side as well. There is no official confirmation, but off-the-record officials say these airstrikes have been going on for a while. There is no denying that the conflict in Myanmar is spilling into India. The region is tense and India is walking a tightrope here. New Delhi has been cautious in its diplomatic relationship with the military junta. 3 reasons. Number 1 is the security implication of a flare-up in Myanmar. The border, is porous, stretching across states like Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland, Manipur and Mizoram. There are multiple armed groups in action. Any escalation in tension will have a direct bearing on India's security. Then there is the refugee crisis. People fleeing Myanmar end up in India, especially the Rohingya. They're an ethnic minority. They faced persecution and a genocide a few years back. The United Nations says there are around 16,000 Rohingya refugees in India. The government estimates there are more than 40,000. And the third reason is China. China has been eyeing and increasingly playing a big role in Myanmar. It is arming the generals and lapping up infrastructure projects. India must remain in play through its developmental projects and engage with the junta while also pushing for a return to democracy. Like I said, it is a tightrope walk. And it's a much more difficult and nuanced approach than the Western one. The West has announced sanctions and issued statements. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, they've all sanctioned firms linked to the military in Myanmar. The US has even targeted the military-approved election commission in the country. It has sanctioned current and former military generals, mining enterprises, and energy officials. For the first time, America has also slapped sanctions on the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. On the UK's target list are companies supplying aviation fuel to the military. British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said, and I'm quoting, "Our sanctions are meticulously targeted to deliver maximum impact, reducing the military's access to finance, fuel, arms, and equipment." This is from Britain. Australia too has announced sanctions for the first time against the military. It has held 16 people responsible for what it calls egregious human rights abuses. Canberra has imposed sanctions on 2 major military-controlled conglomerates. These 2 groups dominate Myanmar's economy. But who is being hurt by these sanctions? The junta is tightening its iron grip, and it is the people who are suffering. I have some numbers. More than 2,900 people have been killed in the junta's crackdown on dissent. 1.5 million people have been displaced. 40,000 homes have been burned. 8 million children are no longer in school in Myanmar. 15 million people are facing a food shortage. This is according to the United Nations. And this is not all. As we speak, a brutal civil war is raging in many parts of the country. Myanmar was earlier known as Burma. It is home to more than 50 million people. It became an independent country in 1948, and since then it has seen rampant ethnic strife and violence. It has witnessed one of the longest-running civil wars in the last 70 years. 2 years back, there was another coup. It was led by the army chief, General Min Aung Hlaing. The military junta toppled the government of Aung San Suu Kyi. They seized control of the country. And this is what Myanmar looked like yesterday. Empty streets, shuttered shops. Why? Because it was part of a silent strike. A strike called by pro-democracy activists. They urged the public to stay indoors to protest against the coup on its second anniversary. Outside Myanmar, the protests were not so silent. The million-dollar question is, when will the next elections be held? The ruling junta says the country is facing quote-unquote unusual circumstances. Of course it is. They've extended the state of emergency by 6 months. What does that mean? It means that elections which were scheduled for August this year will most likely be delayed again. And whenever the elections are held, it's safe to say that Aung San Suu Kyi will have no role to play. Her party, the National League for Democracy, won the last election. When the coup took place in 2021, Suu Kyi was put under house arrest. Now she's serving a 33-year jail sentence. This is after 18 months of trial on 19 charges. Also after she defended the very same generals for the Rohingya genocide. She stood up for them at the International Court of Justice. Now they've jailed her. What about her party? The junta made sure that the party is also destroyed. Thousands of its members are in jail, and those that escaped are in hiding. 4 activists were executed last year. And these were the first cases of death penalty in Myanmar in the last 30 years. The military has also announced new rules for political parties, rules that favor a military proxy filled with former generals, the party that Suu Kyi defeated in the last 2 elections. Myanmar has plunged into chaos. The generals are fighting on multiple fronts. And for the people, the road to democracy, the road to an election booth and to peace is a long and arduous one. And here's a story that everyone has been talking about, the extraordinary developments in the Adani Group. Late last night, the group's chairman made a surprising announcement.
After a fully subscribed FPO, yesterday's decision of his withdrawal would have surprised many. But considering the volatility of the market seen yesterday, our board strongly felt that it would not have been morally correct to proceed with the FPO.
This was Gautam Adani, the chairman of the Adani Group. A few days ago, he was the richest man in Asia. His business empire was worth over $200 billion. That's more than the GDP of many countries, like New Zealand, Hungary, Morocco, Slovakia, Sri Lanka, Oman, just to name a few. Now, his ports-to-power conglomerate is caught up in an ambush. The Adani Group has 10 companies listed on the Indian stock market. In 1 week, they have lost over $90 billion in market value. Mr. Adani himself saw his wealth decline by at least $50 billion. The bleeding continued today. Adani stocks fell further. So what is happening to this group? Well, there's lots to cover. We'll start with the latest. Mr. Adani's late-night announcement was about an FPO. What's that? It's about the sale of new Adani shares. And let me explain how this works. When a company goes public for the first time, it's called an IPO. That's initial public offering, IPO. The first time, people like you and I are allowed to buy shares in a company. After that, the company is listed on the stock market. Now, companies don't sell all the shares to the public. Sometimes the owners keep a bigger share of the pie themselves. They sell them in limited quantities and in different tranches to the market. Usually when they have to raise fresh cash or to pay off debts. That's when they launch an FPO. FPO is follow-on public offer. It offers a new lot of shares of the same company. And this is what the Adani Group was offering: more shares of Adani Enterprises. It's the flagship company of the conglomerate. The offering was successful. All the shares on offer were bought out. Investors paid $2.4 billion for them. But Mr. Adani decided to pull the plug.
For me, the interest of my investor is paramount and everything is secondary. Hence, to insulate the investors from potential losses, we have withdrawn the FPO. This decision will not have any impact on our existing operations as well as our future plans.
What is he referring to? Right now, Adani shares are trading at a much lower value. The new investors had paid a premium for the same shares. So they would have suffered a loss, which is why Mr. Adani withdrew the offer. All the money, the entire $2.4 billion, will be returned to the investors. This is an extraordinary move, but given the circumstances, it was perhaps necessary. The Adani Group is under attack by a research firm called the Hindenburg Research. It is based in New York. On the 24th of January, it published a report. It claimed that the Adani Group is engaged in stock market manipulation. It questioned the company's alleged use of tax havens. Hindenburg said the Adani Group is pulling off a con, and that's not all. It is betting on the group to fail. And this is typical Hindenburg. They have a long history of doing this. They have taken what investors call a short position against Adani. What is a short position? It's like a bet for the price of a stock to go down. So Hindenburg is betting on this stock to fall, and it could potentially make money off this. The Adani Group has been fighting these allegations on every front. A few days back, it published a 413-page rebuttal. It termed the allegations an attack on India itself. I had that statement with me. Let me read out from that statement. This is not merely an unwarranted attack on any specific company, but a calculated attack on India. The independence, integrity, and quality of Indian institutions, and the growth story and ambition of India. The statement came out on the 29th of January. It was meant to assure investors. So far, it hasn't. The next few weeks are critical. This is a developing story. We'll keep you posted. In Europe, it's been a week of protests. 500,000 people are out on the streets in the UK. These are teachers, bus drivers, civil servants, men and women who run the country. They say they're earning a salary that was fixed 10 years ago, but paying for things at 2023 prices. Basically, it's a cost of living crisis. Inflation is at a 4-decade high. In France, the scenes aren't very different. Here, the working class wants to retire early. The government wants to raise the retirement age. How will that help? Our next report takes you to London and Paris and decodes what's being called a workers' uprising in Europe.
What do we want? 10%. When do we want it? Now.
London, Edinburgh, Swansea, Liverpool. It's the same scene across the UK. This is Walkout Wednesday. 500,000 workers, including teachers, university staff, civil servants, border officials, and train and bus drivers, are on strike. They have one battle cry. Enough is enough, they say. They want better pay and better working conditions.
We need you to raise our pay. Rishi Sunak, hear us say.
This is the biggest protest in a decade. The last time something like this happened was in 2011. The impact has been widespread. Schools were shut. Rail services were halted. The military had to be put on standby. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has condemned the strikes.
Mr. Speaker, when it comes to teachers, we've actually given teachers the highest pay rise in 30 years. It includes a 9% pay rise for newly qualified teachers and record investment in their training and development. I am clear that our children's education is precious and they deserve to be in school today being taught.
Protesters say they're struggling to make ends meet.
The pay that we're receiving just does not align with the work that we're doing, the hours that we put in, and inflation at the moment in this cost of living crisis. And so we're striking because we have to make our point that enough is enough.
We're here to strike against the government's woeful funding of education, not just for teachers, but the whole education system as a whole. We're here to show our support for everybody else who is striking as well. And yeah, down with the Tory government. It's pathetic.
We're all, as I said at the beginning, we're all striking for similar issues to do with cost of living, to do with unequal pay, to do with better working conditions, better working practices, and we have those cross-cutting themes.
Inflation in the UK stands at 10.5%, the highest in 4 decades. Food and energy costs are skyrocketing. Protesters want better pay. The government says a wage hike will worsen inflation. Economic projections look grim. The International Monetary Fund says the UK will be the only major economy to contract this year. It will do worse than Russia, and this will have a direct impact on Sunak's ratings. It's the same story in France. Over 1 million people took to the streets this week, more than 87,000 in Paris alone. Demonstrations also took place in more than 200 towns and cities. Schools, transport hubs, and oil refineries came to a standstill. There were reports of vandalism too. Some 11,000 civil and police officers were deployed. They used tear gas to control the situation. Why are the people protesting? The government has raised the retirement age from 62 to 64 years. The people of France are against it. They want to retire early. Why does the government want to raise the retirement age? To save cost. Every retired person gets a pension, some $1,500 a month. France has an aging population. There are more retirees than workers, so the current pension system is very expensive. The government wants to pay a pension to fewer people. It's raising the age of retirement. The bill was presented at a cabinet meeting this week. The government aims to pass it by this summer and hopes that the changes can take effect by September. The French Prime Minister has called the move non-negotiable. The Labour Ministry hopes to save up to $20 billion a year, but the people are up in arms. Look at the protest signs. One said, "Retirement before arthritis." Another said, "Leave us time to live before we die." President Emmanuel Macron was re-elected last year. Then he promised to overhaul the pension system and lost a majority in parliament. His popularity has fallen to a record low. According to a poll, only 29% of the voters are happy with Macron's leadership. Macron's challenge is not unique. Retirement age is a political hot potato in Europe. France has the lowest retirement age in the region. In Italy, it is 67 years. In Spain, 65. In Germany and the UK, it's 66 years. With economies under stress and inflation rising, these governments are struggling on multiple fronts. The surging energy prices have had a cascading effect. The result is evident on the streets of London and Paris. It's the working class rising in protest.
And now let's talk about money, the geopolitics of money. Every day we tell you about global trends, about economies under pressure, currencies going up and down. Today we want to discuss how the world economy functions. You see, every country has its own currency, but every country does not use its own currency to interact with the world. So which currency do they use? Mostly the US dollar. The dollar is the currency behemoth of the world. No currency comes close to it. We're talking in terms of usage, oil trade, goods trade. Generally, most of the world trade is settled using the US dollar. Most international transactions between countries and companies are conducted using the dollar. The dollar is also the world's dominant reserve currency. What does that mean? A significant chunk of wealth owned by countries around the world is held in dollars. It's their reserve currency. They save their money in dollars. Global financial systems will collapse without the US dollar. So will the world economy. So the dollar and the US have a lot on their shoulders. And that's not necessarily a good thing. As of 2020, the US had close to $2 trillion in circulation. 2 trillion. And guess what? Half of that is believed to have been in circulation outside America. What about the markets? Around 90% of forex trading involves the US dollar. Forex, of course, is foreign exchange. 90% of this is done in the US dollar. Almost 40% of the world debt is issued in dollars. So how did the dollar become so powerful? It all happened after the Second World War. Until then, all currencies were valued in relation to gold. So gold was the benchmark. currency values were determined based on this principle. How do they compare with the value of a specified quantity of gold? After the war, the US and its allies came up with an agreement. It was called the Bretton Woods Agreement. Do you know what it did? It replaced gold with the dollar. So all national currencies were valued in relation to the US dollar. That's how the dollar became so important, which is why we now say that the rupee is trading for such and such amount against the dollar. Its value is determined in comparison to the dollar. And this became the trend after the Second World War. Then came the oil boom, and the oil boom led to a dollar boom. You see, the dollar has become the world's dominant currency. It became the dominant reserve currency by the 1970s. So it only made sense for oil trade to be settled using American dollars. Oil transactions were made using American dollars. This came to be known as the petrodollar system. And investors stick to it because the dollar gives them a sense of stability. And that's purely on a business level. On the government side, though, the thinking is changing. Many countries are realizing the pitfalls of being overly dependent on the US dollar. Take Russia, for instance. Before Russia invaded Ukraine, it held more than 600 billion US dollars in foreign reserves. 600 billion. The US weaponized its dollar supremacy. It froze Russia's holdings. And the US can do this with any country it wants to. This realization, the kind of power that America wields, is making many countries extremely uncomfortable. China, for instance, it's skeptical. Russia, of course, has been burnt firsthand, which is why it is pushing BRICS to develop a common currency. BRICS is an acronym for a group of 5 top emerging economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS. Together, BRICS have a 24% share in the global economy. They represent 40% of the world's total population. If they do come up with a common currency, a BRICS currency, it could pose a stiff challenge to the US dollar. And the dollar is not the only one. Let's talk about the euro too, the official currency of 20 European nations. Together they form the Eurozone, countries that use the euro. This region has 344 million people. The euro has one of the highest combined values of banknotes and coins in circulation the world over. Why wouldn't it? Hundreds of millions of people use the euro. The sheer size of the Eurozone gives it a mathematical advantage. Then comes Japan's yen, the world's 3rd most traded currency, also the 3rd biggest reserve currency globally. 4th on the list is the UK's pound sterling. It is the world's oldest currency that is still in use. Next is China's renminbi, better known as the yuan. China wants the yuan to be used as a reserve too. It has sealed deals with countries like Russia, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Japan. What do these agreements do? They allow for trade to be settled directly in the yuan. So China has pushed the US dollar out of the equation. At least with these countries, it is trading directly in the yuan. Reports say it is trying to secure a similar deal with Saudi Arabia, which will be a very big deal. China, you see, is an oil guzzler. It buys a lot of its oil from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia makes up for 18% of China's total crude oil purchases. In the first 10 months of last year, 2022, the first 10 months, here's how much China paid Saudi Arabia for oil: more than 55 billion US dollars. Imagine that trade being settled without the dollar. And imagine more countries working out similar arrangements. In fact, that's already happening. Brazil and Argentina plan to announce a common currency. Russia and Iran are working on a cryptocurrency backed by gold. India and the UAE are looking for ways to conduct non-oil trade in rupees. Last December, Sri Lanka agreed to use the Indian rupee for all international trade with India. India and Russia also took a big step. The rupee was used for the first time to settle foreign trade between India and Russia. In fact, India's central bank, the Reserve Bank of India, has a whole mechanism in place. It's called the International Settlement of Trade in the Indian Rupee. The goal is quite simple: to facilitate settlement of trade using the rupee. Bangladesh is also considering settling bilateral trade in Indian rupees. The world, you see, is changing. Countries do not want their fortunes to be held in one currency, at the mercy of one country. The big currencies the world over have had it too good for far too long. Their uncontested rally may be coming to an end. Have you heard of the friend zone? Worse, are you one of its numerous so-called victims? Then you'll want to watch this. A man in Singapore has sued a woman for rejecting him. He sued her for $2.3 million. He says he developed feelings for her, but she only saw him as a friend. And this has caused him emotional trauma. They say don't let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game. But must you sue someone if you land in the friend zone? Our next report tells you all about it. There is a famous saying, life is the flower for which love is the honey. But when deprived of said love, should you seek money? That's exactly what's happening in Singapore. A man has sued a woman for rejecting him romantically. Love makes the world go round, and it makes you do crazy things. But this is not even the craziest part. Can you guess how much the man is suing the woman for? 3 million Singapore dollars or 2.3 million US dollars. He filed the lawsuit in High Court for damages. This is against the emotional trauma he suffered after being rejected. And guess what? This is his second lawsuit against her. The first one was for 16,700 US dollars. What was that for? For breaching an agreement to improve their relationship. That lawsuit was struck down last month. The court called it an abuse of process. The court said it was a quote-unquote calculated attempt to compel engagement from the woman, to which the court would not be an accessory. It also hailed the woman for standing up to the man instead of giving in to his demands. Now a pre-trial hearing is set for next week. We'll have to wait and see how this matter is resolved in court. But to us, this sounds like a case of the friend zone gone quite wrong. Does this word sound familiar? It's been all the rage in pop culture. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, My Best Friend's Wedding, even the first half of Kuch Kuch Hota Hai. Friend zone refers to an ostensibly platonic relationship in which one person is romantically interested in the other. Women often call it the nice guy syndrome, while men refer to this zone as the living hell of frustration and loneliness. The concept of friend zone has been expanded to include women, but popular imagination usually relegates the term to well-meaning guys vying for attention. And in reality, men have often responded to rejection with aggression. We looked it up. Here are some of the headlines that popped up. In June 2022, an Egyptian man killed a student in front of a university for rejecting him. In August 2022, a business tycoon in Pakistan allegedly sexually harassed and tortured his daughter's friend for rejecting his marriage proposal. In April 2021, a Kuwaiti woman was murdered and abandoned after she rejected the killer's proposal. And this is fairly common in India too. A Delhi man stabbed a girl 30 times after she rejected his proposal. In Telangana, a man led a violent mob to abduct a woman after she rejected his marriage proposal. The list seems endless. Women face a very real danger when saying no to a man. The danger of violence and abuse, even death. Now this has a label of its own. It's called rejection violence. And it has become a pervasive global phenomenon. It takes minimal effort to uncover dozens of cases in recent years. And these are not isolated incidents. Because we treat them so, it makes them even more dangerous. So we fail to analyze the causes and provide solutions. The pain of rejection is real. On a practical note, some sympathy and maybe a reminder that no one is owed a relationship can go a long way. But coming back to the case in Singapore, if this lesson is learned, then maybe this whole saga will have served some purpose. The year 2000 is calling, and this time Gen Z is picking up. What am I talking about? The so-called dumb phones. They're making a comeback. But what are dumb phones? Basic handsets or feature phones. They have very limited functionality compared to iPhones and Androids. You can make and receive calls, send SMS text messages with these phones, and if you're lucky, you can listen to the radio and take basic pictures. But you surely can't connect to the internet. They're similar to the handsets people bought in the late 1990s and early 2000s. These brick or flip phones are seeing a revival. Google searches for them jumped by 89% between 2018 and 2021. 1 in 10 mobile phone users in the UK had a dumb phone in 2021. Today, India has more than 350 million users of dumb phones. 350 million. which begs the question, what's behind this revival? Like most trends, social media plays a part here. After the 2017 relaunch of Nokia's 3310 handset, dumb phones began appearing in TikTok videos and Instagram reels. The phone was first released in the year 2000. It was one of the best-selling mobiles of all time. And in today's world of high-spec mobiles, its relaunch showed the world an affordable alternative. Of course, the nostalgia contributed to the craze. Who doesn't miss a good game of Snake on their Nokia? In fact, the company made an announcement earlier this week. It said it was gaining ground in the mobile phone market. These handsets cannot compete with the premium phones in terms of functionality or even performance, but they have a wide range of benefits. Longer battery life, more durability, affordability. In the UK, such handsets can cost just £8. That's roughly 800 Indian rupees. In India, these devices cost less than 1,500 rupees. Reports say the number of Indians upgrading from feature to smartphones is going down. Last year, the number was only 35 million. 2 years back, it was 60 million. But here's the biggest factor in favor of these phones. Dumb phones may be making people smarter. Study after study has shown that smartphones adversely affect our intelligence levels. They also reduce our attention span. The so-called doom scroll is often blamed for this. You know what's doom scroll? It refers to the infinite feed that doesn't end, no matter how much you scroll through it. Social media posts just keep coming. The liking, the sharing, the commenting then takes over. And this has reached such a point that it seems like smartphones have become the superior species that control humans and not the other way around. So it's not shocking that people are returning to dumb phones. They say brick phones are making people more productive, more proactive. Some are even calling it the dopamine diet. Because once the barrage of notifications stops and you make your way through FOMO, or the fear of missing out, and conquer it, you're free from being a slave of the bursts of dopamine, which is the brain's happy chemicals, the ones that your phone gives you. And experts are not surprised that people are ditching sleek smartphones. Many are also motivated by privacy concerns. Privacy, you see, is no less than a privilege in this day and age. We use smartphones to save our time. In exchange, we give up our privacy. When we use free apps, we are the product, because these companies become privy to all aspects of our life. And no one can deny that the switch from smartphones to dumb phones is tough. After all, we depend on our phones for the simplest of tasks. When was the last time we remembered a colleague's birthday without an email? Or asked the locals to find our way to a destination? It is quicker to book a cab on an app, but for all of this, we allow companies to log and sell our data. And the precious time that we gain? Well, it's usually squandered scrolling through the social content anyway. Does that mean you should junk your smartphone? The choice is yours. I'm not sure I can do it. I'm not sure I can go back to that mode, but I do envy people who can. I'm sure the low-tech and hard-to-text-on simplicity can be comforting at some level. For some, switching to a dumb phone could make for a smart choice. And finally, it's time to wrap up with Vantage shots, images that tell the story. 2 pianists and 4 saxophonists are making commute fun for people in France. In Ireland, people celebrated St. Bridget's Day. Not much is known about St. Bridget. As per anecdotes, she is seen as a symbol of women empowerment, and that calls for celebration. And scientists have released a picture of what looks like a teddy bear face on the surface of the moon. We're leaving you with these images. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.